Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sumin, BMW support technician. Thank you for joining this webinar. Just before we start, just letting you know the chat bar is open on the right-hand side. If you have any question, just type in the chat bar. I will do my best to answer it during the webinar. Otherwise, everybody will get emails afterward. All right, so let's start. This webinar will cover 4 common problems with BMW engines. So N55 Valvetronic fault, N55 VANOS fault, B38, B37 fuel mixture, and temperature pressure sensor leaking. They are pretty common, but the last one is kind of very interesting. Without knowing this problem, it will be pretty hard to find because we never have this kind of issue before. So that one will be very interesting for you guys. All right, so N55 engine, it's very familiar. The first picture is standard N55 and same engine on active hybrid. And the last one is S65 on M3 and M4, but basically all same engine, we have same problems. I got 3 instrument classes here. Can you recognize which one is which? Yes, it's quite obvious, isn't it? So we have M symbols in the middle of the instrument cluster. So obviously, this instrument cluster is for M car. So E90 M3, the first one. The second one is E46 M3. The last one is F80 M3, which is the latest version. But the interesting thing is the maximum RPM on F80, which is the latest one, we only have 8,500. E90, which is the previous one, is can do up to 9,000. E46, same, 9,000. The latest one, from 7,000, you're getting the yellow warning. The reason is Valvetronic. The Valvetronic is great, and it's good for the fuel economy, but not that helpful for the top-end power. That's why BMW never used Valvetronic on M engines before, but now we start using the Valvetronic on M cars as well. See how complicated they are. It's very complete component. And because of the high friction, we have problem with friction surface wearing out. N46 engine, which have first generation Valvetronic, and 62 engine, also very similar. We have common problem with Valvetronic wearing out, causing misfire on low RPM or cold start. This picture I got from one of our customer. And when you look at the number 1 eccentric shaft, yes, looks like worn out. But the problem is there is no specification and there is no measurement we can do. The number 2, which is also second-hand, but by looking at it, looks much newer condition. So we replaced it and the problem was solved. But again, yes, by looking at it, looks worn out, but there is no way we can measure it. There is no way we can be 100% sure. The problem is the eccentric shaft. All right, so as a technician's view, the great disadvantage of Valvetronic is reliability. This engine is still, quite new. We don't have this kind of mechanical issue yet, but we don't know yet because they are getting old. There is 2 different types of customers complaining. The first one, clicking noise from the engine compartment. Let's check for the noise. All right, so clicking noise from the engine compartment, and the motor is making the clicking noise when engine is turned off. And the noise can also happen when the DME is waking up, and the noise will there until engine is restarted. And this is the key thing. There is no fault code on the DME, and there is no issue with driving performance. So the customer still can drive the car, and there is no issue while you're driving the car. The second complaint is rattling noise. Let's check for the noise. All right, so the rattling noise is actually much louder, and it's only for 2 seconds. The Valvetronic servo motor making rattling noise when DME is waking up, and is high frequency and stop after 2 seconds. And it can be sporadically or it can be continuously. And this is the key thing. One or more fault can be stored in the DME. And there will be issue with the driving performance. Depend on where the motor stop, the customer can have situation like non-start or not much power while driving. That's why most of the time when the car goes to the workshop, there will be the second situation. All right, so this is the possible fault code on the DME, and some of them is related with initialization, but there will be issue with doing the service function because there is a fault in the system. And you can see the quick test I have from one of our customer, and you can see the Valvetronic servo motor position sensor fault. Before, on N46 and 62 engine, the servo motor and the eccentric shaft sensor was separate. But now the sensor is integrated into the motor. So we have only one unit, which is motor and the sensor inside. So this is the wiring diagram for the servo motor. Lots of wires, but actually it's very simple. The pinout test for this, the first we need to check the power supply to the sensor, which is 5 volt, and you will see the 5 volt on pin number 11. And we have pin number 10, you should have ground. Other 5 wires, they are the sensor reading. So you will see 3.5 volt, one at a time. So that means if you slowly turn the motor with your hand, you will see 3.5 at pin number 9, and pin number 2 will have 3.5, pin number 4 will have 3.5. If you turn it anti-clockwise, exactly same thing, but the direction will be different. So we see pin number 4 will have 3.5, and then if we go to pin number 2, we'll have 3.5. That's exactly same as DME is recognizing which direction the servo motor is turning and how fast it's turning and the position of eccentric shaft. When you see the servo motor is also very simple. Pin number 5 will be 12 volt supply. And depend on whether the DME wants to spin the motor to clockwise or anti-clockwise, you will see us at 6 or pin number 7, which is very simple. This is the situation of faulty DME. When the servo motor is seizing up, it's quite open, it can damage the DME. I would say about 30%. When I have 10 cases with the servo motor failure, 3 out of 10 having issue with the DME as well. So this pinout test is very important. So you can see, so this is situation of faulty DME. We only have 7 volt at the motor, which is obviously faulty because you should have 12 volt at pin number 5 all the time with ignition on. So if you can see 7 volt at pin number 5. Then we need to check the voltage at the DME, which is pin number 2. If you have 12 volts, that means there is no issue with the power supply to the DME. So input is okay. But if you have output only 7, we are losing the voltage internally inside the DME. Well, when you do this test, we are not doing backprobe test because we don't know whether there is an internal shorting inside the motor to the body. So we need to disconnect this M6353 connector and check the voltage directly from the connector when motor is disconnected. When the sensor is faulty, which I've seen a few times, and the quick test I have, this one. So it's saying position sensor is faulty. So the way we can confirm the problem with the position sensor is checking for the voltage. They will have exactly 3.5. So if you can see, one of these pins have lower or higher, means the sensor is faulty. And quite often you will see 3.2 or lower. That's what I remember from our customers. All right, so when you have issue with the voltage supply to the motor, it's not always having issue with the DME. This integrated supply module is also common to fail. So this is full wiring diagram for the integrated supply module. You can see there is 3 relays. So relay 1, 2, 3. Relay number 3 is Valvetronic relay. And that's the one that's quite common to play out, but not on always relay number 3. Relay number 1 also can fail, which I've seen a few times. In case of having issue relay number 1, there will be no communication to the DME at all. So you can't start the car. When you do the pinout test, these fuses will have no power, even if there is a trigger from this trigger is actually coming from the DME. So even if there is a trigger, no power at this fuse, that means there is a problem with this relay. The unit looks like sealed unit, but actually you can remove the cover, you can replace this fuse. If you are good at soldering, you can replace this relay as well. If you have faulty integrated supply module, you can keep in the workshop because you still have 2 good relays here. But that's only when if you're good at soldering. All right. This is BMW recommended repair procedure. First, replace the servo motor. If same thing happening, then replace the servo motor again with the eccentric shaft. If same thing happening even after replace these 2, it's saying replace the cylinder head. But I haven't seen this serious case yet. Most of the time, it will replace the servo motor and eccentric shaft, and some rare case, DME as well. Just be mindful, after replace the servo motor, we must do the service function before you start the car. So we go into service function, go into Valvetronic, adaptation, limit position. This is very important. And what I usually recommend, do this service function before you put the local cover back on. That way, we can physically see the servo motor is working correct, and there is no issue with the eccentric shaft and the servo motor. Because what I know is these engines are getting old. I know when this engine was quite new, we was replacing the servo motor only. But recently, as from like last year, there was lots of customers saying, I replaced the servo motor only, had a similar problem, ended up with replacing the servo motor eccentric shaft again. So what I'm doing now, when I see the customer having issue with the servo motor, I always recommend to replace the servo motor and the eccentric shaft together. So this is the servo motor. As you can see, the wide range of BMW using same part. When you're doing this job, there is 2 things you need to be very careful. Injector on this engine is very weak. According to the BMW instruction, when you're removing this injector, you must use this special tool and torque wrench. So when you torque wrench, you need to set 5 Newton meter, and you turn the torque wrench clockwise. So with this special tool, if you turn the torque wrench clockwise, means you are removing this injector. While your injector is pulling out, if you have click on your torque wrench, that means it exceeded 5 Newton meter, you must replace this injector. But unfortunately, to replace this servo motor, you need to remove 4 injectors. So there is a chance, especially on old engines, high mileage engine, you need to replace 4 injector. Each injector will be around $500, means $2,000 on the top of the job you quote already. So before you do this job, inform the customer there is a chance you need to replace a couple of injectors. It depends on the condition. My small tip is before you remove this injector, try to warm up the engine. So before you start doing this job, before you start stripping, make sure you warm up your engine a little bit. It will help. But if it's still having more than 5 Newton meters, it's not your fault. We just need to replace those injectors. The second thing is, as I mentioned, recently I was getting lots of cases, customers saying, I replaced the servo motor, still having same problem, and ended up with replacing the eccentric shaft as well. See where the noise coming from. The noise is coming from the motor and the gear on the eccentric shaft. And seen it a few times, the damage on the gear, and you might don't recognize it. You may not able to see it, but it will have same problem. When you see the job time, only the servo motor is 6.7 hours. When you're replacing the servo motor only, there will be 6.7 hours. But if you're replacing servo motor and eccentric shaft together, that is 8 hours. There is not much difference between servo motor only and eccentric shaft together. So that's why I recommend replace the servo motor and eccentric shaft together, so we don't need to take a risk of doing same job again. When you're doing this job, when you're replacing the eccentric shaft, we need to have this special tool because there is quite high spring tension on this. All right, so N55 VANOS issue. This problem was there from N52 engine. Engine is much more advanced, but unfortunately, we still have exactly the same problem. This is a quick test I have from one of our customer. You can see this is M4 S65 engine and intake camshaft angle deviation. Whenever we have fault about the cam related, this charging pressure fault always come up together as a secondary fault. Quite often people concentrating on this charging pressure fault, but don't worry about this charging pressure because guarantee this is the secondary fault. The problem is cam angle. Whenever we have problem with the camshaft, we always need to swap this solenoid first because it's nice and easy and it's pretty common. This solenoid is become block or it can have issue with actual valve. So if you can see the fault move to the other side after you swapped it over, obviously we need to replace the solenoid. And just be mindful, there is a small check valve, not many people knows, but there is a check valve on each side and they are also quite common to be blocked up and losing the spring tension. So that we also need to have a look. When we have issue with the VANOS, the live data is great help. So we go to diagnostic request and go to live data for VANOS angle, intake and exhaust. You can change into graph and you can see this is good running engine. As you can see, the angle on intake and exhaust is fluctuating, depend on the accelerator pedal position, depend on whether you pressed or not, and how hard you pressed. This is faulty exhaust, and you can see exhaust side is not moving at all. But interestingly, intake is also stopped. because the fail-safe mode. There is a bit of a hiccup from the intake. Once the intake realizes there is a fault in the exhaust, and both of them will stop working. It's quite important you connect your tool and get this live data before you start the engine, because if you connect your tool after engine running for even for a few seconds, you will miss that hiccup. Then we don't know whether there is a problem with the exhaust or intake, because both of them is not working anyway. So this is BMW recommended repair procedure. So first saying program the DME, and then on the N55, check for the VANOS fault. But these engines also can have similar problem. The bolt is possibly broken or missing. Programming DME on this N55 engine is highly recommended. I remember when this N55 engine was very new, when I was in the dealership, we had a very similar problem. But that time, what we was doing, we was programming the DME and remove the local cover, manually wind back the servo motor. The reason is the servo motor was traveling too far, and that was the motor was seizing up because it was traveling too far. So manually wind it back and program the DME. So they fixed the software not to travel too far. Especially if the if you have N55 with old model like a E90, you still can have N55 engine. Check for the update available. If there is an update available, please do the update. So this is all the models using same part. As you can see, still E90, E91, they are using exactly same, the VANOS unit. All right, B38 Fuel mixture fault. You will see this engine, on the small cars like a Mini or 1 Series. This is 3-cylinder turbocharger engine. This fuel mixture fault is very common problem. Engine warning coming on, and you will see one or more fault on the DME, saying fuel mixture too lean, fuel mixture too lean, large deviation. And this is the quick test I have from one of our customer. As you can see, it's got exactly same fault. Fuel mixture too lean and fuel mixture too lean, large deviation too high. All right, you can do the component activation, and you can compare the noise between faulty solenoid and the good solenoid. Let's check for the noise.
Opus.
All right, did you see the difference between the faulty solenoid and the good one? So first we need a new one. We need a new solenoid valve and do the component activation, which you can do it with AutoLogic, and listen for the noise. And you swap over the solenoid and see the difference. If the tank ventilation valve in the vehicle is louder than the new part, replace the tank ventilation valve. When I have case with B38 engine, I would say about 60% of my case is the fuel mixture issue. Possibly the engine is quite new, but so we may have different problems afterward. But so far, this problem is very common. You go into general, we go into component activation, and you can activate the fuel tank ventilation valve and listen for the noise. And if you can see the noise is louder, then we need to replace the valve. When you're ordering part, just be mindful, we can only use March 2019 onward. You will be surprised you can still buy the before modification part. They're still selling all those parts if those parts in stock. N20 engine blowing smoke in the morning is very common problem. We know the fix, which is the small check valve in the turbo oil feed line. I had a few customers, they bought the oil feed line, but there is no check valve. Luckily, those customers checked whether there is a check valve or not. If they replace the valve without having the check valve, then there will be exactly the same problem, which is 8 hours job, but the problem will be the same. This control valve also can be the old one. That means even after you replace it will be okay for a little while. Eventually, you can have same problem. With the fuel mixture fault, I had a few cases with fuel mixture too rich. So the problem with the fuel tank ventilation valve, you will see the fuel mixture control mixture too lean. But you also can have fault with the fuel mixture control mixture too rich. That could be because the customer is doing short distance only and frequent engine starts. I had a few cases with the too rich fault, and what we did, clear the fault, reset the adaptation values, and we informed the customer. Never came back. So it takes time to come back, and if the customer knows it's because of the short distance travel, then that is what it is. All right, so you can see there's a few other BMWs using the same part, and potentially we can have the same problem on these cars. All right, fuel leak. This is super interesting. In my experience with the BMW, I never have this kind of issue before. All right, so the symptoms can be vehicle difficult to start sporadically, and engine warning lights coming on. You can see one or more fault, but actually you will see a lot more than these four. The problem is, internally, the fuel pressure sensor is leaking. We have couple of different type of fuel leak, but this time we having fuel leak internally from the sensor. So the diesel will fill up this connector, and it will travel everywhere. It's just through the wiring. This case, the recommendation from the BMW, replace the wiring harness and also need to replace DDE control module. What I have from one of our customer, as you can see, there is lots of fault. There was actually more. You can see this is the fuel temperature and pressure sensor. So one sensor is sensing temperature and pressure. This is power supply. So as you can see, this power supply is joined with other components. So there's a few other components on this same power supply line. So this diesel will follow this wire. It just go everywhere. And it also goes into the DME, actually TDE. Same thing. You can have old part. So you must check the part number. We must check the part number. When you're ordering this fuel temperature and pressure sensor, you can order only the fuel lines. So you can order complete fuel lines, but not only the sensor. So this is a part number for the fuel lines, but this part number doesn't say anything about the sensor, the temperature sensor. You need to check the temperature sensor part number. The fuel pressure sensor part number. These three part numbers, they are the better one, so you can use these one. But if you can see the index number 1, you need to return it. Surprisingly, they are still selling the index number 1 pressure sensor. I had a case a couple of months ago. The customer called me and saying engine is fully covered with the diesel, and the owner of the vehicle, the car was out of factory warranty. So the owner of the vehicle didn't want to spend, money on this car. So what they replaced the pressure sensor and they cleaned up everything. The car came back about 5 times. It kept coming back for this problem and replace one sensor, take the car back, and comes back after 2-3 weeks and having problem with other parts. that car ended up with replacing DDE. So when you have this kind of problem in your workshop, I'd recommend to replace the DDE from the first stage, because when you see the full of diesel on the DDE connector, guarantee those diesels are inside the DDE as well. So the fault may not come back straight away, but eventually those faults will come back. So this is the whole assembly. You can only buy this whole assembly. You can't buy the sensor only. But when you buy these fuel lines, please make sure you have modified sensor in the middle. All right, that was the end of the webinar. Let's have a look. Anyone was asking questions? All right. I don't see any questions. So thank you again for joining webinar. If you have any question, please give us a call or send an email to me. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you.